most countries who've industrialized and moved to being middle income, which is where Ethiopia wants to go, has gotten there through garments. Garments is an industry that is a beginning for many, many, many countries. A garment is one of the easiest things to manufacture. A laptop computer is one of the most difficult things, or an iPhone is one of the most difficult things, but nobody manufactured an iPhone without having to learn to manufacture a garment. China is a good example. They started in garments, that's the base. From there they grew to making vehicles, then making computers.
በኢንዱስትሪ ልማት አሁን እየመጣን ያለን ሀገር ነን ጀማሪዎች ነን ብሎ መውሰድ ይቻላል ከቅርብ ጊዜ ወዲዮች ነው ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርኮችን ባለሀብቶችን እያመጣን ያለነውና ኢንዱስትሪ ልማት ስትራቴጂያችንም እያመጣ ያለው ውጤት አለ
So garments is a good place to learn how to do the basic industrial functions like organizing a factory of workers, having that routine of coming on time, accuracy. Logistics, being able to move products, raw materials in and finished products out fast, quickly, cheap. We've learned a lot, we know what it takes, and now it's the time to actually implement.
በፈረንጆች አቆጣጠር ጁላይ 2016 አካባቢ ነው ይሄ ፓርኩ ወደ ስራ የገቡ አንዳንድ ኢንዱስትሪዎች ነበሩና የሰው ኃይል ፍላጎት በጣም ወሳኝ ነበር ፓርክ ውስጥ የተለያየ አይነት ሙያ ይፈልጋል ከትንሽ ኦፕሬተር ጀምሮ እስከ ሱፐርቫይዘሪ ሌቭል ድረስ ይፈልጋልና ያንን የሰለጠነ የሰው ኃይል ማቅረብ ላይ ትልቅ ፈታኝ ነበር ለኛ አሰራር ስርዓቶችን ልምዱም አልነበረንም
ስሜ ሁብቱ ጋብስ ይባላል ነው መጣውበት ማልጋ ወረዳ ነው ስራ ከጀመርኩ 4 አመት ሊሞላ ነው ታሳስ ስመጣ ማለት ነው አንድ አመት ስራ የለኝም እዛ ቁጭ ብዬ እናቴ ጋር ነው ሳለፍኩት የሳሙና የሁሉም ነገር እሷ ነው ማው እስከ እሷ ነው ይቀበላል
በመጀመሪያው ቦሌ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ሲመሰረት ባለሀብቶች ይገቡ በአገር ደረጃ ልምድም አልነበረንም ለነሱ ሊደግፍ በሚችል የተያዘ አቅጣጫ አልነበረም የወደቅን የተነሳን የተደገፈ ነገር ብዙ ቢኖርም ግን በጣም ኦርጋናይዝድ በሆነ መልኩ ማቅረብ አልተቻለም ነበር ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ሲቋቋም ግን መጀመሪያ የሚፈልገው የሰው ኃይል በአንድ ጊዜ በአጭር ጊዜ በጣም በርካታ ነው ይሄን ለመድረስ የሚያስችለን ቁመናም የለንም
ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ፕሮጀክቱም ሲታሰብ የሰው ኃይል አቅርቦት ፖቴንሻል ኤሪያ ነው ተብሎ የተለየ በመሆኑ ሲንገባ ምናልባት ከግንዛቤ ጋፖች ካልሆነ በስተቀር ከፖቴንሻል ጋር ተያይዞ ያሉትን በ100 ኪሎ ሜትር ሬዲየስ ውስጥ ያሉትን ሌበር ሞቢላይዝ እናደርጋለን የሚል እቅድ ተይዞ ነው የተገባው
በምን ያህል ደሞዝ ነው ሰራተኛው መጥቶ ስራውን መስራት ያለበት የሚል አዲስ ስለነበረ ግልጽ ነገር ተቀምጦ ወደዛ አልተገባም እዚህ ከመጡ በኋላም የማደሪያም ችግር ነበር ሰራተኞች እዚህ ይመጣሉ ከመጡ በኋላ የት ነው የሚያርፉት የተወሰነ ቀደም ተብሎ የተመቻቸ ነገር ነበር እሱም ብዙ ውጤታማ አልነበረም በወቅቱ መንገዶቹ ውስጥ ለውስጥ ያለ ሰራተኞች በሄዱበት አካባቢ በአግባቡ ያልነበረበት ሴኩሪቲው ሰራተኞች ደህንነትን ከማስጠበቅ አንፃር ክፍተቶች ነበሩ ትራንስፖርቴሽን እጥረት ነበር ሰራተኛው ወደ ቤት ሄዶ እንደገና ወደ ስራ የሚመጣበት እንደ አይነት ክፍተቶች ነበሩ በመጀመሪያ አካባቢ
This industry is very new for them. At the meantime, most of the people came from the agricultural background. Then our challenge was how can we convert this agricultural background young ladies into the industrial, the change into the industrial sewing machines.
I think the discussion started with government and with factories early on. Even before the factory started manufacturing in Hawassa Industrial Park, there was a recognition that the large amount of workers, particularly at operator level, that factories were going to hire were not going to be available around the vicinity of the industrial parks. So if you see Awassa and the number of people that live there and the number of people that are in formal employment in Awassa, and then you see the employment needs of the industrial park, which at full capacity will be about 60,000 operators, it was quite clear that there needed to be a program that made the employment linkage between the job seeker and the work available at the industrial park a little bit easier.
እንደሚታወቀው እነዚህ ኢንቨስተሮች በዚህ በጋርመንት ግሎባል ማርኬት ውስጥ በጣም ብዙ አመት ይኖሩ ናቸው። እነ ፒቪኤችን ብትወስድ 110 ምናምን አመት፣ ሌሎች እነ ታላሉ 70 አመት፣ እዚህ ፓርክ ውስጥ ትንሹ እድሜ 30 40 አመት ነውና እነዚህ ኢንቨስተሮች ኢንቨስትመንቱ አላቸው፣ ቴክኖሎጂው አላቸው፣ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ስታንዳርድ የሚያሟላ ፓርክ አላቸው። ሌበሩን አግኝተው ሌበሩን ትሬን አድርገው ስራ ጀመሩ ማለት ሁሉ ነገር ኮምፕሊት ሆነ ማለት ነውና በጣም ክሪቲካል ነው ሌበር ለፓርኩ።
ስሜ አበራሽ ብራሞ ኦቸያሙማ የተወለደው ሸበዲኖ ወረዳ ቀበሌ ዲራም አንፈራራ ወደዚህ ተራርጄ ነው የመጣሁት። በፊት ገጠር ስላለ ምንም ነገር አልሰራም። ትምህርት ብቻ ነው የምትማረው፣ ስራ የለም። ንግድ አይችልም፣ ደግሞ ንግድ አይችልም። ከዛ በዛ ሰዓት ገንዘብ የለም። ገንዘብ ምናምን እንትን ሳምና ምናምን ፋዘር እና ማዘር ነው የሚጠይቀው። ለእርሱ እንትን ሸበዲኖ ወረዳ እንትን ስለላኩ እነርሱ ወደዚህ ያመጣ። ከዛ የት ይኖራችሁ ብሎ ማንም መጠየቅ የለም። በዛ ሰዓት እግዚአብሔር ብቻ ነው እኛ ጋር ያለ። ከዛ ጌታ አትጣለኝ ቢል እግዚአብሔር መጸለይ ጀመር። ከዛ
So we spoke to investors and we asked them what their needs were, and they brought a lot of people from countries like Sri Lanka, from countries like India, China, Bangladesh. These were senior, experienced supervisors. And they said, we can train the workers on how to sew a t-shirt. The technical skill we know, but we can't train them in terms of their soft skills, in terms of their attitude, their orientation, their understanding of issues of time management, communication. In fact, we can't even communicate with them. So can you help us with that training? It was to say, let's get all the factories to pool their demand for workers and to cooperate with the government that has offices in every zone, every warada and every qabali, to screen workers, to check their certificates, to check their eyesight, to check all these other things before they come to the city, and then to organize that they travel to the city, organize that they have housing when they arrive in the city. All these things have to be coordinated. So we had to create a spirit of collaboration, and this was how we created the HIPSTER project.
Our main intention for HIPSTER was to develop a vibrant labor market that supported the industrial parks. In order to do that, our role essentially was a facilitative role to bring the different players within the market who wanted those services and to match up those players in a way that could be sustainable going forward. At the time HIPSTER was designed and launched, the stakeholders consisted of, in Awassa, we have the Bureau of Trade and Industry, which is responsible for conducting sourcing and screening at the Qabali and Warada level. We have ETIDI, which is responsible for conducting the grading activities at the park. We had 5 private training institutions to give direct soft skills training to the workers. We had Awasa Investors Association, which represents the 22 factories that are in the park. And we had enterprise partners. All of these stakeholders were governed by a HIPSTER steering committee that was chaired by the Ministry of Trade and Industry, and later on was co-chaired by the Ministry of Trade and Industry and the Ethiopian Investment Commission. This has now evolved a little bit. We no longer have private training providers. So the training is now given by the factory in-house trainers themselves, supported by a network of master trainers that are in ETIDI or that may be private master trainers. In addition, we now have the inclusion of another private sector service provider, which is the database service provider.
በስትሪንግ ኮሚቴው ላይ የኛ ሚኒስቴር መስሪያ ቤት ዋናው ሰብሳቢ ነበረ። በተለይ ፕሮጀክቱን የጀመረው ሰሞን ተከታታይ የሆነ ስብሰባዎችን፣ ውይይቶችን፣ አቅጣጫዎችን በመስጠት ፕሮጀክቱ የተሻለ አፈጻጸም ከጅማሮ እንዲኖረው ያደረግንበት ነበር።
ከሂፕስተር ፕሮጀክት ጋር ኤምኦዩ አለን። የኢንቨስተሩን ጥያቄዎች በሙሉ በአንድ ቼን ለሂፕስተር እናቀርባለን። ሶ ጥያቄዎች ከቀረቡ በኋላ ደግሞ ያው ሶልቭ የሚደረጉበትን ሁኔታ እናመቻቻለን።
Supporting industrial parks from the UK government perspective was a top priority because we have understood that developing the garments and textiles in the industrial parks, it would create more jobs.
ምልመላ ላይ አፕሮፕሪየት የሆነ የስራ ሂደት ላይ የትኛው ሪክሩት የሚደረግ ሰራተኛ በየትኛው መስመር ላይ መመደብ አለበት የሚሉ ስራዎች ነው እንትን የሚደረገው። እዛ ላይ እንደ ዋና የስራ አካል አድርጎ ኢቲአይዳ የራሱን ሮል እየሰራ ያለበት ሁኔታ ነው ያለው።
የኛ ሜና ልጆቹን መልመለን ወደዚህ እናቀርባለን። እነሱ ፍላጎታቸውን እየሰጡናል። ይህን ያህል ሰው እንፈልጋለን ሲሉ እኛ ታች ሄደን እስክሪን ተደርገን ልጆቹን ወደዚህ የማቅረብ ስራ ነው የምንሰራው።
በአሰሪና በሰራተኛ መካከል ያለው ግንኙነት ሰላማዊ ሆኖ አሰሪው ምርትና ምርታማነቱ እንዲያድግ፣ ሰራተኛውም ሰርቶ እንዲለወጥ፣ ከዛ በዘለለ ደግሞ ሰራተኛው ጤንነቱ እንዲጠበቅ፣ ደህንነቱ እንዲጠበቅ አድርጎ እዛ አካባቢ ደህንነትን ሊጎዱ የሚችሉ ነገሮች ካሉ እንዲታረሙ በማድረግ በአጠቃላይ ያው በዋናነትም ሰራችሁ ስራዎች የስራ ክፍል ትኩረት የሚያደርገው ይሄ ነው።
የኢትዮጵያ ኢንቨስትመንት ኮሚሽን በፓርክ ውስጥ 3 ሮሎች ነው ያሉት። የመጀመሪያው ሮል አዲስ አበባ የሚሰጡ ማንኛውም የኢንቨስትመንት ኮሚሽን ስራዎችን፣ አገልግሎቶችን ለኢንቨስተሮች መስጠት ነው። እዚሁ ባሉበት በጣም ብዙ ስራዎች አሉ ከ20 በላይና እሱ የመጀመሪያው። ሁለተኛው ደግሞ እንደ መንግስት አንድ ማዕከል አለ። ሁሉም የመንግስት ተቋሞች አንድ ማዕከል ውስጥ ገብተው አገልግሎታቸውን በአግባቡ እንዲሰሩ የማስተባበር ስራ ነው። ሶስተኛው ስራ ደግሞ እንደ መንግስት ሬጉሌተር ነው። እዚህ ውስጥ ብዙ አካላት አሉ። የኢንቨስተርስ አሶሲዬሽን አለ፣ ፓርኩን የገነባው አይፒዲሲ አለ፣ ማህበራት አሉ፣ ኢንቨስተሮች አሉ። እነዚህ አካላት በአግባቡ ስራቸውን መስራታቸውን ሬጉሌት ያደርጋል እንደ መንግስት ማለት ነው። ኢንቨስትመንት ስራ ስለሆነ ፍቃድ የሚሰጠው እሱ ስለሆነ ኢንቫይት የሚያደርጋቸው ያመጣቸው እዚህ እሱ ስለሆነ አምጥቶ አገልግሎት ይሰጣል። ግን እያንዳንዱ ስቴክሆልደሮች ፕሮፐርሊ ኃላፊነታቸውን ተወጥተዋል እየሰሩ ነው የሚለው የሬጉሌሽን እነዚህ ሶስቶችን ስራ ነው የሚሰራው።
So the work of enterprise partners is about bringing together stakeholders in situations that is not easy. And that's what we call the art of facilitation. It's about understanding not what the differences are, not what the gaps are, but what their common interest is, and setting out a path of steps that you can take to de-risk them, because there's always risk, and to identify mutual interest. And I think that process of just talking and talking and talking and putting everyone in the room, creating transparency, creating access to information, enabled the investors to make decisions, the government to make decisions in a coordinated way. And I won't say that we did all of that together, but we played a very important part specifically around labor and labor challenges to making that work.
It has come in a situation where there is a complete absence of institutionalized labor market system in the country. It would have been a very complicated and difficult takeoff for the factories in the absence of that system or the intervention that HIPSTER has set up in Hawassa Industrial Park.
This is a Sri Lankan based company. This is the first company we have set up overseas in 2016, October. So our product mainly is socks. We do the socks production only. So our group is the largest manufacturer in Southeast Asia for socks exports. So at the moment we have a capacity of 1 million pieces per month and export as well. We are catering to Europe and the USA markets, and we have 600 workforce at the moment. So ultimate our expansion will be around maximum utilization will be about 900 labor.
እዚህ ሐዋሳ ወንድሜ ቤት እያለሁ ይሄ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ስራ ተቃጥሏል የሚባል ወሬ ሰምቼ ቀበሌ 04 ሄጄ ተመዘገብኩ። ከዛ 10ኛ ቀን ወደ ሽግግር ነው አሉን። ስልክ ሰጥቼ ስለያል መጣ። ኦፕሬተር ላይ ሲንግል ማሽን ነው መጀመሪያ የለመድኩት። ድጋሜ እዛ ሲንግል እየሰራው እንደገና ዲዛግ የሚባል ማሽን ያለ እሱን ሰራ። ኦቨርሎክ ሳይድ የሚሰፋ ጎን ማለት ነው የሚሰፋ ፋሽን ስለማምጃለሁ። እንደገና ደግሞ ዌስት ባንድ ፍላት ሎክ የሚባል ማሽን አለ። ዌስት ባንድ ወገብ ብቻ የሚሰፋ እሱን ሰራ። ከዛ እንደዛ ሆኜ ተነስቼ ዳሩን ተቆጣጣሪ ተብዬ ወይኔ ጌታ ወይ ይችላልው ግን ይሄንን ሁሉ ሰው እያልኩ ለመድኩና ሰራ። ከዛ መጀመሪያ 22 ልጆች ነው የሚቆጣጠረው። አሁን ወደ 60 ምናምን ልጆች ነው የሚቆጣጠረው ማለት ነው በሶስት ላይ
22ቱም አንድ ላይ ነው በፊት የመጣው። እነሱ ደግሞ ሌላ ስራ ቢንቶ አሁን ወጥቷል። እኔ ብቻ ነው እዚህ የቀረሁት። እኔም ደግሞ ይሄ ሳይሆን ይሄም አያበቃም ብዬ ምን ይሻላል እንትን እድገት ይሻላል። እድገት ይፈልጋል። ገና ሊደርነት ነው የሰራሁት። አሁን አያሲት እየተማርኩ ነው። ሊደርነት ዲፕሎማ ከወሰድ በኋላ ሊደርነት አልሰራም። እዚህ ቢሮ ገባለ ብዬ ነው። ከዚህ ማወጣም እዚህ ሆኜ ቢሮ ገባለ ብዬ ነው።
በኢትዮጵያን ኢንቨስትመንት ኮሚሽን በኩል አንድ ኢንቨስተር ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ ላይ ጆይን ሲያደርግ አውቶማቲካሊ የአሶሲዬሽኑ ሜምበር ይሆናል። ሶ የአሶሲዬሽኑ ሜምበር ሲሆን ኤኒ ካይንድ ኦፍ ሪኩዌስት ትሩ አስ ሪኩዌስት ይደረጋል። ከዛም መካከል አንዱ የሌበር ጥያቄ ነው።
This help a lot for us because here everybody is the needed the people here. The apparel industry is totally depend on the machine to man ratio is 1:1. Then with that means we need a right people.
So whenever we want the labor, so we normally we request from the system to the grading center. So they allocate us. So we have to go there and bring them to our company.
So when we first designed it, it was very different to when we finally finished the design. But when we first designed it, we saw it as a simple system of training workers for factories. We didn't see it as actually two services combined in one. The first service was training, but the service that needed to be combined with the training was the recruitment.
I think the HIPSTER program was the main program with which we built a number of interventions around in order to attract and retain quality workers for the industrial park. The three main sections of that was, firstly, we had the services for labor mobilization. So that is where we actually had screeners go down to Qabali level to where potential workers lived and actually inform them about the labor opportunity. So there we would do sourcing, which is just about informing of the job and what the job might look like.
ቀበሌ ውስጥ ነው ሸበዲ ነው እንደ አይነት ስራ ወጥቷል ብሎ ቀበሌ ውስጥ ያለው ስለነገረ ኑ ብሎ ጠራ። ከዛ እነርሱ መዝገባት ተመዘገበ። ከዛ ወደዚህ መጣው። ሲመጣ በጣም ፈራ። አሁን ደግሞ ምንም ያለ ደግሞ ሐዋሳ ሲሙ ሐዋሳ ነው ስራ አለው ሐዋሳ ስራ ወጥቷል ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ ሲሙ ብቻ እንዴት ነው የሚናፍቀው?
የሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ጋርመንት ሴክተር ላይ መስራት የሚፈልጉ እድሜያቸው ከዚህ በላይ የሆኑ ወጣቶች ብለን የቀሰቀስን። ከዛ በኋላ ፍላጎት ልየታ አንድ ማዕከል ላይ የፍላጎት ልየታ ነው ያደረግነው። ታች የነበረው ነገር መጀመሪያ አካባቢ 2-3 ሳምንት አካባቢ ላይ ትንሽ በምንፈልገው መልኩ ሰው ማግኘት አስቸጋሪ ነው የነበረው። ከዛ በኋላ ምንድነው ያደረግነው? በቀበሌ ደረጃ ላይ ሰዎችን አሳይን ያደረግነው እዛ የመንግስት መዋቅር ውስጥ ያሉትንና ከዚህ ከፕሮጀክቱ ጋር የተቀናጁ ሰዎችን በማድረግ በስፋት ያሰራንበት ሁኔታ ነው ያለውና ይሄን ስንሰራ ያው ግራጁዋሊ ውጤታማ እየሆንን እንደመጣ ነው።
የሂፕስተር ሞዴል ባይ ዘ ዌይ የአገራችንን ናሽናሉም የኢንተርናሽናሉም ሌበር ሎው ላይ አላይን ያደረገ ነው። ያን መሰረት አድርገው ነው። ምክንያቱም አሁን የምልመላ ስርዓታችን ላይ ብትሄድ ማለት ነው ኢቨን እድሜያቸው ከ18 ዓመት በታች የሆኑ ሰዎች አይመለመሉም። ያ ማለት የልጆች ጉልበት ብዝበዛ የሚባለው ነገር ለማስቀረት ኢቨን ያ ከኢንዳክሽን ፓክ አለን ዋን ፔጀር የምትባል ያቺ በየምልመላ ጣቢያዎቹ ላይ ተለጥፈዋል። እዛ ኢንዳክሽን ፓክ እያንዳንዱ ስለ ምልመላው፣ ስለ ቅጥር ሁኔታ፣ ስለ ደሞዙ ኤቭሪቲንግ ኢን ዲቴል ስቴት ተደርጎ በየምልመላ ጣቢያው ይለጠፍላቸዋል። ዋንስ እነዚህ ልጆች ለስክሪኒንግ ሲመጡ ያንን መረጃ አይተው ነው። ያ ስክሪኒንግ የሚደረገው ደግሞ በአካባቢያቸው በወረዳቸው ስለሆነ ከአካባቢያቸው ከመምጣታቸው በፊት ያንን መረጃ ጋዘር አድርገው ስለሚመጡ ለነገሮች እንግዳ አይሆንም። ምንም እንደሚያስፈልጋቸው ምን አይነት ቻሌንጅ እንደሚገጥማቸው ሁሉ ነገር ሬዲ ሆኖ ነው የሚመጡት። እንደዛም ሆኖ ያው በአሰና የሰራተኛ ማዕከል የተወሰነ ክፍተት ሊኖር ይችላል። በዛን ሰዓት ሌበር ዩኒቲ ይባላል በኢትዮጵያ ኢንቨስትመንት ኮሚሽን ስር ያለ እነሱ ጋር ቅሬታቸውን ያቀርባሉ። በእነሱ ቅሬታቸው መሰረት በመጀመሪያ ደረጃ ካምፓኒዎቹና ልጆቹን ኮሚኒኬት ያደርጋሉ የሌበር ዩኒቲዎች ዘንድ። ከነሱ በላይ ከሆነ ደግሞ የሪጂናል ቦልሳዎች ያሉ ቢሮ ኦፍ ሌበር ኤንድ ሶሻል አፌርስ ከነሱ ጋር በጋራ ሆኖ የሚሰሩበት ሁኔታ አለ።
ሶርሲንግ የሚሰራው በክልሉ ንግድና ኢንዱስትሪ ቢሮ ነው። ሶርሲንግ የክልሉ የራሱ በአመት የሚመዘግባቸው የስራ አጦች አሉ። ከዛ ውስጥ ለሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ የሚሆኑትን ደግሞ የመለየት ስራ ይሰራል።
We would then screen, and that is to see if there was a potential job match. So there are some instances where that worker is not able to work in the industrial parks, such as if they're underage. So even if the labor law says that you can hire someone at 15, within the HIPSTER program, we had to make sure that that person was 18. So we would screen for that level of information.
ሲባዛ ምናምን እሱን ነው ፈተነኝ ትንሽ እንትን ማለት ነው። አንድ 10 ጥያቄ ከዛ ደግሞ የአይን ማጣሪያ አይን አይወራም በአፍ አይወራም እንጂ ሩቅ ያሉ የነሱ የጻፉትን በእንትን በምልክት ነው የምናሳየው። እሱ ነው የቀረበልን።
ቤዚክ የሆኑ መደመርና የመቀነስ ፈተናዎች ስክሪኒንግ ቴስት ይላሉ። እድሜያቸውን በ8ኛ ክፍል አይዲ ቼክ ተደርጎ እዛ ጋር ከ18 ዓመት በታች የሆነች ልጅ ወደ ኋላ ትቀራለች። ስለዚህ ስክሪኒንግ ፎርም ላይ እነዚህ ነገሮች ቼክ ይደረጋሉ። እንደገና ኢንተርቪዎች አሉ። እነዛ ኢንተርቪዎች ስራው ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪ ፓርክ ነው። ሐዋሳ መኖር ትችላለሽ ወይ? ቤት በመንግስት የሚዘጋጅ ኮኦርዲኔት የተደረገ ቤት አለ። አንድ ቤት ለ4 ነው የሚሆነው። ለ4 ሰው መኖር ትችላለሽ ወይ? ክፍያው ቤዚክ ሳላሪው ይሄ ነው፣ እስከነ ጥቅማ ጥቅሙ ይሄን ሊደርስ ይችላል የሚል ሙሉ ኢንተርቪው እዛ ላይ አለ። አሁን የተቋቋመውን ሲዳማን ክልል ጨምሮ 11 ካችመንት ኤሪያዎች አሉ። እነዛ 11 ካችመንት ኤሪያዎች የሚመጡ ሰራተኞች ያው አብዛኞቻቸው የትራንስፖርት ችግር አለና በመንግስት ያ በጀት መደገፍ ስላልቻለ ኢንተርፕራይዝ ፓርትነርስ ወይም ኤፒ ሰራተኞች ከካችመንት ኤሪያቸው ሲመጡ የትራንስፖርት አበላቸውን ይሸፍናል። ስለዚህ እነዛን ከስክሪኒንግ ባለሙያዎች ጋር ኮኦርዲኔት በማድረግ ለነዛ የሚመጡት ሰራተኞች የትራንስፖርት አበል 300 ብር የተሰጣቸው ሐዋሳ ኢንዱስትሪያል ፓርክ ይመጣሉ ማለት ነው።
So once that local government institution conducts their screening and gives the screening form to the worker that's seeking the job, then the worker is transported or is supported to come to the industrial park for the job. Once they arrive at the industrial park, then another stakeholder kicks in. We have a private sector institution that provides database service along with the EIC.
One of the challenges is that every factory focuses on its own need and says, I need 200 workers this week, I need 400 workers. But the labor market, all those job seekers out there, they don't know how that is or how it's changing. So what we wanted to do was create an information system that would send a signal, first of all, to the factories to say, how many workers are there in this area, in this area, in this area, so that they could know where to go when they needed workers. But also for the workers to say how many jobs are being demanded every week. That communication between job seekers and employers was really what the database is for. So every worker that moves into the factory provides their photograph, their fingerprint, when they do the tests to see how they perform in terms of things like hand-eye coordination or dexterity of their fingers, things that are important for manufacturing. All that information gets recorded. When they receive a training, we can now know how many workers have received training. That helps an investor imagine all the way in India who wants to come to Ethiopia to say, you know, I don't just have a general sense that there are available labor in Ethiopia, but I actually have statistics to tell me we can invest in Ethiopia because there are this many workers of this category and the productivity is this. So it becomes almost like a passport for workers so that we can see the factories work and the way the labor market works as well.
Once that worker passes through that system, then they're then graded, which means there are standard grading tests, about 10 of them, based on the results of her test, whether she's a sewer or a quality assurer, and that's also inputted into the database.
Basically, grading ማለት ሶስት ነገሮች ናቸው። አንደኛ ትሬናቢሊቲ ነው። የመማር የመያዝ አቅሙ ወይ ደግሞ ነገሮች ተነግሮት በትክክል የማስተላለፍ አቅሙ ምን ይመስላል ይሄ ሰው። ሁለተኛ የዴክስትሪቲ ማለት እጅ፣ እግሩ፣ አይን ሲንክሮናይዝ ሆኖ መስራት ወይ ለየብቻ መስራት ይችላል ወይ። በሶስተኛ ደረጃ ከለር ብላይንድነስ ማለት የተለያዩ ፎርማቶች አሉ፣ በትክክል ሊያያቸው ይችላል ወይስ ከለር ሲቀየር ይቸገራል የሚሉት ናቸው።
ግሬዲንግ ሴንተር ስክሪኒንግ ፎርም ይዞ ከመጡ በኋላ ፔፐር ወርክ ላይ የነበረው ነገር ወደ ኮምፒውተር ይገባል። ዴን ያን ከገባ በኋላ ባዮሜትሪክ ወይም ደግሞ ፊንገርፕሪንት አሻራቸው ይወሰዳል። ለዛች ልጅ ብቻ የሚጠቅም ዩኒክ አይዲ ጀነሬት ያደርጋል። ይህንን ካደረገች በኋላ ልጅቷ ሲስተም ላይ አለች። ስለዚህ የትኛውም ስቴክሆልደር አዲስ አበባም ሆኖ ኢአይሲ እኛም ሌላም ቦታ ሆነን ዛሬ ማን እንደተመዘገበ የትኛዋ ልጅ እንደተመዘገበች ሁሉም ሰው በዛ ዳታቤዝ መሰረት ማየት ይችላል ማለት ነው። ስለዚህ እቺ ልጅ ሲስተም ላይ ትገባለች፣ ፑል ላይ ትገባለች ማለት ነው።
Most advantage we are using is to the system we request. At a glance we can have how much of labor we have, what categories, and all this data it's available with the system.
That is very good because we know that what is the skill of there and for which operation they are specified, and the database is very, very important. And because sometime in here there are a lot of our team members are willing to learn, then we also help them for that to learn, because after they complete the degree we are tell them to okay, you come back, then we can identify with the database where they are and what are the operations they have done before. Then with the degree and with the education background we can decide for which area we have to focus on them. That is the really important for us.
ፑል ላይ ከገባች በኋላ የአሎኬሽን ቲሞች ወደ ስቴጂንግ ያስተላልፏታል። ስቴጂንግ ፑል የሚባል አለ። ሬዲ ሆናለች እቺ ልጅ ስራ ለመጀመር ሬዲ ሆናለች። ስለዚህ እዛ ዳታቤዝ ላይ አሎኬሽን ቲሞች ካምፓኒዎች ሪኩዌስት ባደረጉት መሰረት አሎኬት ያደርጋሉ።
Once that's done, then that worker is allocated to a factory that's seeking workers. That allocation is done by the Ethiopian Investment Commission along with the HIPSTER Investment Association. So that association supports the allocation process.
አንደኛ ስንመለምልም ማንም ኢትዮጵያዊ በዚህ ውስጥ እኩል እንትን ነው የሚሰጠው። ኢንቨስተሮቹም አሎኬት የምናደርገው በጥያቄያቸው መሰረት በቅደም ተከተል ቀድሞ የጠየቀ ቀድሞ ያገኛል።
ሽግግር አንድ ወር ቆይተናል። ስልጠና የተሰጠ ማሽን እየተለማመደን ማለት ነው። አንድ ወደ 15ኛ ቀን ላይ ፓርክ ቀጥታ ሄደን
በቃ ሰማይ ይመስላል። እያንዳንዳችሁ እነርሱ ጠርቶ እንዲህ አይነት በግል አስቀምጦ ህጉና ደንቡ ምን አይነት ህግ አለ ምን አይነት ደንብ አለ ብሎ አስተማረ። ሁለተኛ ቀን ደግሞ ማሽን ቦታ ይዞደ ማሽን ቦታ ስንሄድ በቃ ማርፌ ማስገባት ቦታ ብዙ አለ ከዛ እኛ ሐላቃቹን እንትን አስለመደ። ላኑ ላይ 3 ወር በኋላ ላኑ ላይ አስገባ። ከዛ እኛም መስራት ጀመረ። ከዛ ለመደ በሰራ።
The second bucket of services was around coordinating the labor market around the industrial parks. The coordination is at a high level, is coordinating all the stakeholders within the HIPSTER Steering Committee, chaired by the Ethiopian Investment Association and the Ministry of Trade and Industry, to ensure that the needs of all of the relevant stakeholders were well met.
ክልልን የማስተባበር ስራ ይኖራል። ሌሎች የመንግስት ተቋማትን የማስተባበር ስራ ይኖራል። የተለያዩ ኤጀንሲዎች የተለያዩ ተቋማትን ማስተባበር የሚፈልግ ስለነበረ በፌደራል ሌቭል ላይ በሚኒስትር ዴኤታ ሰብሳቢ ነበርንበት።
So we start with the demand. So the people who are buying the clothes at the end of the day, the customers, they're represented by the big brands. So PVH was the main one in Hawassa, H&M, the Children's Place, IKEA, Decathlon. These are some of the big buyers of clothes in Ethiopia. Then there are the factories, of which there are about 20 in Hawassa. There are about another 30, 40 across other industrial parks. And they have associations as well. Then on the training side, you have training providers, you have soft skills trainers, you have recruiters that come from the government, you have people in the screening centers all the way down to the Warada. Then you have grading center, the Ethiopian Textile Institute. And then you had other development partners like EP that were that we're supporting along the way. The ILO was there as well. The World Bank were involved in different parts of this process. So there was a big set of stakeholders all working towards the same goal.
More broadly, EP played a really critical convening role, bringing together a range of development actors to address the broad range of challenges facing the industrial labour force, particularly looking at the broader ecosystem and understanding from the perspectives of workers what their key constraints and challenges were in their housing and transport situations, as well as their experience in factory.
Third bucket of services were around services to increase labor productivity, which is of course very important for both factories and for workers, and to increase competitiveness in Ethiopia in general. It started with the soft skills training that were given to workers when they first started employment, continued on with technical training, which was done 100% by the factories themselves.
When you are bringing these people, we'll give some education about the hygienic, the importance of that, how is the product safety and the health and safety, and everything we teach them.
The first set of issues is before they even work, most of these workers are coming from outside of the city. They've never lived in a city. Most of these workers are coming from the house of their parents. They've never lived in their own house or with other friends. So a lot of their needs was very simple things like, if I need a health service, where do I go in Hawassa? If I need to rent a house, where can I find that information? Most of them have never seen a factory. So before we talk about a sewing machine, we need to understand, what is a factory? It's a big, loud place with lots of people working very hard. So we had to expose them to that. And I think a lot of the soft skills is around exposure and getting comfortable, because there were people who didn't get this training, that they started their job on the first day and they never came back on the second day because they didn't know what a factory looked like, and they said, this is not for me. So a lot of the training was about making them exposed, making them aware, and understanding how to actually manage in this environment and not be shocked. So it was really based on their needs.
Hi, my name is Aster. I was born and raised in a small village. I have 4 siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My parents are farmers. I didn't pass my 10th grade exam, so I came here to the industrial park for opportunities that could help me make a difference in my life. Now I'm a supervisor. I'm content with what I do. In my 2-year stay in the park, I had some ups and downs. I'll share my struggles and triumphs with you. This is my struggle, my journey, my success. I made it.
The soft skills modules that we have are audiovisual training content that help the worker make this transition from a farm to a city, from a farming household to living alone or perhaps with roommates. And coming into an industry setting every day, 9 to 5, that transition requires some sort of training that isn't just about how to use a machine. So the soft skills training talks about making this transition from rural to urban life. It talks about her place in the garment value chain. So the t-shirt that she's working on, where does that go, and how she fits into that chain. And it also addresses soft skills like communication. If you have an issue with a supervisor, how do you handle it? So it's very, very important to have this level of common training that all newcomers to the park receive. Continued on with additional interventions such as the Women Support Services training, where we recognize that 90% of the employees being women, being new to industrial work and factory settings, would need additional training around gender relations and health products and services training. So we implemented that. In addition, we implemented a human resource standardization manual, which supported factories that were first starting to set up in Ethiopia to understand Ethiopian labor law, Ethiopian culture around human resource management and such. And that manual is now given to each factory when they first start working inside the industrial parks. It's actually on the Ethiopian Investment Commission website. The last intervention that we designed around that was Tatari, which enabled workers to save 10% of their income, and that was matched 10% by the factories for a certain number of years. And then we had an ecosystem of donors and government institutions that would want to provide workers with working capital loans or sheds should they want to start their own SME once they've been saving for 3 to 5 years. It was a very successful program. We tried it for 1 year in one factory, and now 2 additional factories have now signed up.
ቤተሰቦቹ ላይ ስራ ብላችሁ ነው ወደዚህ የመጣችሁ። ከዛ አሁን እናንተ ከዚህ ሰርታችሁ ከዚህ ካገኛችሁ ደሞዝ እና ብር አታባክኑ፣ በአግባቡ ጠቅሙ ብሎ ነገረ። እነርሱ ሲነገር በኋላ እኛም አይ በሃለጋው ብር አላወጣም፣ እነርሱ የሰጡትን ሳይሆን ዛሬ ብቻ ሳይሆን ነገም እንዴት ነው የምንኖረው፣ ነገ እንዴት ነው ይሄ ደግሞ ዛሬ ብር ይሄንን ሳወጣ ነገ እንዴት ነው ማለት ነገ ምን ይቀራል ብለን አስበን ቆጥበን ሰራን።
HIPSTER itself as a program has been quite successful because it's been able to link thousands of women that actually want jobs to the job opportunity that's in the park. Without HIPSTER, she would have never heard of that job opportunity. So in the fact that it's an employment linkage program that supports factories finding workers and supports workers finding employment, it's been hugely successful. And a testament to that success is that the government has now made it into its national IP labor sourcing program.
The biggest challenge in the industrial park was that people were leaving the factories very quickly. They were not staying. So after you've invested all that money in training, they would move on and you'd have somebody new. So you're always dealing with workers, a workforce who on average have basically less than 1 year of experience. No industry in the world can be successful when its workforce has less than 1 year of experience at any point in time. So our biggest goal was to improve retention, and we've been very successful. We managed to get in the parks where we focused, like Hawassa, retention is now the best. They've been able to hold on. They have the lowest turnover of all industrial parks in Ethiopia now, in the biggest industrial park, and we're now scaling up some of those interventions through different programs. But again, it keeps coming back to the same point of listening to the workers, what are their challenges, giving the feedback back to the factories, back to the government, coming up with plans, supporting the execution of those plans, and monitoring and seeing the results. And if it's working, scale it up. If it's not working, try something else.
ፕሮጀክቱ እንዲቀጥል ይፈልጋል። ምክንያቱም የቅጥርና ኢንተንቅራ ኮንቲኒየስ እንደውም እኛ ፕላናችን ወደ 60 ሺህ ነው። አሁን ገና እንግዲህ 30 ሺህ ገብተናል። ግማሽ ላይ ነው ያለነውና ሰፖርቱ መቀጠል አለበት፣ ፕሮጀክቱ መቀጠል አለበት።
So the first thing that changed was the government decided that across all regions, our model of recruitment in industrial park is the HIPSTER model. And that's been rolled out in every industrial park by decision. At the same time, it does require other things. So the investors have to form an association. We talked earlier, they have to cooperate. So again, in scaling it up, we're sharing the information, we're sharing data to convince investors in other industrial parks to form an association and to collectively recruit workers and allocate workers fairly and equitably amongst each other instead of competing for workers.
It's easy to lose sight of the individual worker when you're sitting and designing programs. and discussing with stakeholders around Ethiopia's industrialization path, it's easy to lose sight of the individual worker that is actually a big part of this journey. I think what I'm most proud of in my work with EP is that we never lost sight of that. We spoke with workers very, very often. We had focus group discussions very, very often, almost on a weekly basis, sometimes for the design of programs, sometimes for the monitoring of programs, and sometimes because we just really wanted to understand, take a pulse check on what the situation was around that time.
ሁሉንም ኦፕሬተር ጎበዝ ናቸው። እኔ ደግሞ ዳካማ ኦፕሬተር ይሄ ላይ አትመጥኑም ትሬን አድርጉ ብዬ ወደ ትሬኒንግ ቦታ ነው የምሸኘው። ከዛ እነሱን ጎብዘው እንደገና ወደ ላይ ይመጣሉ። ያ አሁን እኛ ሰርተና ተጠቃሚ ሆነናል ብሎ ነው ማሰቡት። እኔም እናንተ ካርድም ታገኛላችሁ፣ ሰርቲፊኬትም ታገኛላችሁ፣ ቶሎ ቶሎ ሰርታችሁ አሳልፉ፣ ደሞዛችሁ በቂ አይደለም፣ ጥቅማችሁ ይጠቅማችኋል፣ ማል ላይ የሚገባ ስለሰራችሁ ነው፣ ካልሰራችሁ አታገኙም ብዬ ነው የሚመክላችሁ። ይሰሙኛል። ከዚህ በኋላ አሁን በጣም ከሰርቼ ብቃቴንም የነሱ አሳይቼ ሱፐርቫይዘር መሆን የሚፈልገው ምንም ሱፐርቫይዘር ሆኖ አሁን ማለት ነው የሚከብድ ነገር የለም ይታየኛል። አሁን እዚህ ሆኜ ራሱ እንትኑ ስኬሉን እንጂ ሱፐርቫይዘር ስራ እየሰራው ነው እኔ በኔ በኩል ማለት ነው። ምንም የሚከብድ ነገር የለም። ትንሽ ከቆየው ሱፐርቫይዘር መሆን እፈልጋለሁ።
Every worker I talk to does not imagine that they will be a worker in 10 years' time. They imagine that they will own a factory. And that's a good thing because that creates motivation, that creates drive. That means that they're going to learn the skills from the foreign investors and managers and technical experts that have come to this country. And just like we've seen in places like China, where the owners of the biggest factories in China were workers. And in Ethiopia, there are many big business people who were workers at the ground level who own the business today. So for me, it's a very good sign that every worker wants to, they may be a small business one day, they may be a small shop that is making traditional clothes, or they may be a big factory. But that motivation and that attitude of learning, I think, is going to take us very far.
This industry is really new for the Ethiopian workers. But with the comparing to the, if we go back to the, when we compare to Sri Lanka, the 40 years experience in this industry. But within this shorter period, they have came in the certain level. That is, I know that because better than the Sri Lanka, better than the Kenya, if they get in the next 10 years time, it will grow drastical growth in here.
We're now in the fourth industrial revolution. And it's no different that garments is still going to be a platform for us to grow, but it's going to be a much more technologically driven industrial process that we need to go through. So we have to learn from the past, but we also have to look to the future. And we have to anticipate what are going to be the new opportunities and what are going to be the new challenges that we're going to face. Competition is much higher. And now a lot of countries have seen the industrial parks that Ethiopia have built. Across Africa, they've come, they've visited, and they've said, we want industrial parks like this. So there are about 5, 6, 7 countries actively expanding industrial parks, competing with Ethiopia for investors. So our head start, we have to maintain that position because as well during this COVID period, the number of investors coming in and making big investments in a country is really limited. So we have to fight to keep our investors here at this moment in time. But I think as long as we continue to look to build a sustainable garments industry and a technologically advanced garments industry, I think we'll have a potential to employ millions of young Ethiopians who have this dream, who want to learn, who want to have their own business one day. And it can be a stepping stone for them, just like it can be a stepping stone for Ethiopia.